It was an excellent race at Monza, as tyre wear meant that there was plenty of on-track overtakes and even a fight for the lead between two different teams early on in the race. It was a brilliant weekend of action and there's a lot to talk about, so here's my 5 things we learned from the Italian Grand Prix. My name's Andy and this is Behind the Drive. Verstappen breaks the consecutive win record. Max Verstappen has broken the consecutive win record for a driver with his 10th win in a row in Italy. It was a tremendous performance once again, with the driver fighting well at the start to pass Carlos Sainz, and then a strong strategy from the team ensured that they could take the win comfortably. It's been an impressive run of form for both driver and team, and every weekend it feels like the fight for second is all the other drivers can get. This run of consistent, excellent performances is so incredibly rare to see in sports. It's comparable to the likes of Tiger Woods when he was at his peak in golf, or Serena Williams in tennis. I believe this run of form should be seen in the same light. For the sake of the sport, I hope there's more competition to come through the rest of this season and into the next, but for now I think it's going to be fascinating to see how long this run of form can go for. I believe Verstappen is good enough to keep it going to the end of the year, and it's difficult to see how it could end based on how well they've been doing in 2023. In terms of the race at Monza, Verstappen was calm and controlled despite the fact he was under pressure at the start, but he got the job done on track, having waited for his opportunity, and it came from a lock-up for Carlos Sainz, who was having to work the car harder to keep up the pace. From there, Verstappen was consistent out at the front to ensure he took the win in Italy and break the so-called Monza curse. It's got to be a green box for Verstappen this weekend. It could have been the first ever consecutive purple box performance, but he just missed out on the pole position on Saturday. Verstappen is great to watch at the moment in the sport, and I think this season and this run of victories will be remembered for a long time to come, and I wonder whether it'll ever be beaten, however long it may run for. Ferrari bring the battle for the lead. It was a fantastic start to the race for Ferrari. They had a brilliant car this weekend with excellent straight line speed. This enabled Sainz to take pole position from Max Verstappen, and Leclerc rounded out the top 3. To have 2 Ferraris in the mix has been a rare sight this season, and generally they've continued to struggle with getting the strategy right and have made several mistakes this year through the pit stops. However, at their home Grand Prix, Ferrari were excellent. Following that strong qualifying, Carlos Sainz put in a great opening stint to hold off Verstappen in the opening stages. It was clear that the Red Bull was the faster race car, and it was also being kinder to its tyres despite the fact that Verstappen was in the dirty air throughout. The consistency was strong from the Spanish driver, and there was actually a fight for the lead of the Grand Prix between 2 different teams for one of the first times this year. This was great racing to watch, but it was inevitable that the Red Bull would get the job done with Verstappen. In terms of their strategy, I think Ferrari were fortunate that the optimum approach would be just a one-stop at this circuit. Even with the higher than expected tyre degradation, the strategy to go from the medium to the hard compound tyre made a lot of sense. They were still slower than the Red Bulls, and they lost out to Sergio Perez in the end, but it was still a commendable performance from the home heroes. This weekend, Carlos Sainz in particular was fantastic. He was the lead Ferrari driver, and while both were incredibly close together, it was the Spaniard that had the advantage through the weekend. His ability to defend from Verstappen in the first stint and then from Perez through the second stint was very impressive. The Red Bull was clearly the faster car and was better in terms of tyre wear, but he was able to position his car well into turn 1 to ensure that he didn't give his opposition the space to make a move stick through that chicane. In addition, he did well to ensure that he didn't defend when the other driver wasn't attacking. It wasn't until lap 46 that Sainz ended up losing the position to Perez after some valiant defending. He did all he could to maximise his result, but it wasn't quite enough on this occasion. Overall, the performance of Ferrari this weekend was excellent. The fact that they were in the mix with Red Bull for so long during this afternoon shows just how well prepared they were for this race, and they had a really quick car. The race between the drivers at the end was thrilling to watch and showed just how much it meant to each driver to get onto the podium at Monza, and how closely matched Leclerc and Sainz are right now. It was great to see the team allowing their driver pair to race, but it was something that I wouldn't imagine many other teams would have allowed. I was surprised to see them not intervene after a couple of the battles that they had towards the end, but they brought home 3rd and 4th in the end, which was certainly the best possible outcome for the team this weekend. It's a result that has seen them get into 3rd in the constructors' standings, moving ahead of Aston Martin. This weekend was undoubtedly Ferrari's best this year, and they absolutely deserve a green box. They need to keep these performances up going into the final races of the year, and find a way to maximise their results whenever the circuit allows. Before we take a look at the Mercedes penalties, I want to take a moment to ask you to subscribe to the channel. Right now, the chances are you haven't hit the subscribe button yet, so if you enjoy 5 things we learned and want to find out when I publish the videos after each race, make sure that you subscribe today with notifications on. Mercedes take penalties but maximise their results. The Mercedes pair took 5th and 6th today, and given their lack of straight line speed, this was strong from the team. Hamilton qualified 9th and progressed well by going on to the opposite strategy, starting on the hard compound tyre and being quicker at the end. But both Russell and Hamilton made errors and got penalties as a result. Russell ended up gaining an advantage on Ocon as he exited the pits, a silly move considering Ocon was yet to make a pit stop and was clearly very vulnerable to a quicker car on fresher tyres. It was a silly move and it would have been easy for him to give up that position straight away. Admittedly, the outlap was critical for Russell as he tried to find a way to keep up to the cars in front, but it was unnecessary in my opinion. Hamilton made an error as he closed the door on Oscar Piastri going into the second chicane. It seemed like a really silly mistake, which was deserving of the 5-second penalty that he took. But, like Russell, it didn't make too much difference. He was helped by the fact that Albon had a great defensive drive to ensure he was more than 5 seconds ahead of the Williams car behind. So despite both getting penalties, the Mercedes team maximised their result this weekend. They were the slowest cars in the speed trap, which shows just how much drag their car is producing, even in their lowest downforce setup. But despite that, they made it work with a good qualifying performance from George Russell and a strong race strategy from Lewis Hamilton. I think Mercedes have been one of the most consistent teams this year. They've always been in the mix and have a car that works on many different circuits. Whereas other teams like Aston Martin and Alpine dropped back considerably, Mercedes still found a way to take strong points this weekend. Sure, they aren't where they want to be, but they are still showing signs of the team setup that enabled them to dominate the sport for so long. So it's a good outcome with all things considered, but those silly errors mean it's an amber box for Mercedes this weekend, in my opinion. The Williams team is one of the most impressive in 2023. James Vowles moved to Williams through the off-season, and with it he brought a level of honesty. He's openly admitted that the team isn't where it needs to be to compete further up the order, and the videos that he started sharing on social media are a brilliant example of honest leadership. Alongside this, the team have been one of the most improved this season, and particularly with Albon, the team is starting to become very consistent point scorers. Traditionally, the Williams team does well at high-speed Monza circuit. They tend to develop a specific low-drag setup to give them the maximum straight-line speed. They've now scored points at this track for the 3rd time in a row, as they know it's an opportunity for them to get results from the car which started the year as a backmarker. This year has been no different. The team's high-speed setup allowed Albon to qualify 6th on the grid, right in the mix with the top teams in the sport. The Williams car was one of the fastest in a straight line, and despite not being the fastest in the speed trap, they were the quickest car in terms of getting up to their top speed on the main straight. This meant that they were incredibly difficult to overtake in the race and were able to be in the mix with those top teams. Throughout the year, the FW45 has been developed very efficiently. They've been able to add some downforce whilst not increasing drag too much. All of these factors meant that Williams were in a good position going into this race weekend, and they absolutely took advantage. One thing that didn't work out well on Sunday afternoon was tyre wear. Albon stopped far earlier than the drivers around him due to the higher wear on the mediums, and as a result he had a really tough second stint on the hard compound where he was incredibly vulnerable at the end. Despite that, he only lost a position to Hamilton, who was on the medium tyres at the end, and he kept Lando Norris behind so well despite that tyre wear. It allowed Albon to come home in 7th, which is about as good as they could have hoped for with those circumstances. They set the car up incredibly well for the circuit and ensured that they took more points from this weekend. So it's another green box for Williams. They've had a brilliant season and the trajectory of this team is looking promising going into next year. The weak link is Logan Sargent, and I hope he breaks into the points before the end of the year, but if not, I think there may be quite a few drivers who would be interested in joining Alex Albon in that team. From heroes to zeros. Alpine were on top of the world last week as Pierre Gasly took a surprise podium finish at the Dutch Grand Prix. But this weekend, their lack of pace was disappointing. They clearly have a car that is very circuit dependent, and as a result, both drivers were knocked out in Q1 and then struggled in the race. It's true that the majority of the teams have some better circuits and some worse, but the difference between Alpine's best and worst performances is the biggest on the grid. If the team wants to be a top performer, then consistency is critical, and right now they don't have a car that the drivers can be consistent with. It's a shame to see, but hopefully the team will be better in Singapore, which is more likely to be a circuit that they'll be strong at. So it's got to be a red box for Alpine this weekend. They've struggled to deliver in Italy and ended up with Gasly only ahead of the 2 Haas drivers. Honourable mentions. Liam Lawson is getting his second honourable mention in a row. The driver stepped into the AlphaTauri well and is doing a great job of showing why he deserves a chance in that seat full time. Lawson finished 12th and did well to compete in the mix with a car that's been one of the worst in 2023. It was a shame that he wasn't able to have a benchmark against Tsunoda this afternoon, but he's doing well and I hope to see him race again soon. Valtteri Bottas took Alfa Romeo's 10th point of the season with a 10th place finish. Lots has been said about Bottas' performance in 2023, but he did well to ensure he comfortably beat his teammate this weekend and was there to capitalise once Piastri dropped out of the top 10. So Red Bull's streak has continued and it seems like they and Verstappen continue to be unstoppable. It's incredibly impressive to see this kind of dominance in Formula 1 and it'll be interesting to see how they get on in the next race in Singapore.